Hey there, lovelies, it's me, Bitter Corella, and I'm here in the unknowable dreamscape of the Mind Crypt to talk about Dark Tomes. I've decided to do a new bit here on the show where I talk all about some of my favorite horror writers and give you a little bit of insight into some of my thoughts about them. And obviously, you're all very eager to hear that sort of thing. Today, we're going to be talking about... Who are we going to be talking about? Don't worry, I will consult the highly theatrical orb of all-knowingness to determine which Dark Tome writer we'll be discussing today. Oh look! It looks like we're going to be talking about Stephen King. Alright, we're talking about Stephen King. Master of the Macabre, Sultan of Spookiness, King of Stevens. Now, if you were to ask any rando on the street, who's the top sci-fi writer? Who's the top fantasy writer? You'd probably get, well, a few thousand different answers. But if you're going to ask who's the top horror writer, you know you're just going to get one. And that one is going to be Stephen King. Stephen King. Stephen King! Of course, it's Stephen King. Now, how is it that Stephen King's name has become so synonymous with horror? Now, there was a time when it was trendy to deride Stephen King as just another paperback hack, but I'm glad to say those days are far behind us, and we can all admit it now. Stephen King is actually good. Now, the man is a natural storyteller, and he's got a real knack for spinning a yarn. So his best books are compulsively readable, and even his lesser efforts are usually pretty darn entertaining. Now, he's got a stately, refined style of horror that relies a lot more on psychological tension than you would think for a man who writes stories about rabid dogs and evil wind-up toys. He can put you in a character's head so completely that their terror becomes your own. And my personal favorite example of this is that bit in The Shining where Danny spends an entire chapter being pants-wettingly terrified of a fire hose. Let's look at some common features of the King story. Alright, number one, it's going to be set in a small town in Maine. I mean, King is from Maine, so right what do you know? And King has really made Maine his territory just as much as you might say that H.P. Lovecraft has laid claim to Massachusetts. So all you other writers, back off. Maine is King country. Number two, the protagonist is going to be a writer. Again, write what you know. From struggling wannabe Jack Torrance in The Shining to recently successful graphic novelist Clay Riddle in Cell. The protagonists of King's books tend to be writers, and their situation very often reflects how King himself is feeling about his career at the time of writing. Three, name-checking popular consumer products, especially cars. And if you're in a King story, I hope you like Big Detroit Steel, because you're going to see lots of Chryslers and Cadillacs. Four, people just naming things. Like, that's just a thing that happens. People in King stories tend to just give odd, fanciful names to things. Again, I can think right off the top of my head in Cell when they're walking down the road and whenever they encounter a bunch of cars crash, they decide to call it a road reef. People just do that sort of thing in Stephen King stories. I mean, Stephen King is a writer, so maybe he thinks everyone thinks that way. 5, kids with psychic powers. You see them in The Shining, you see them in Firestarter, you see them in The Langoliers. They're just 5, kids with psychic powers. You'll see them in The Shining, you'll see them in Firestarter, you'll see them in The Langoliers. They're all over the place. King just loves kids with psychic powers. And 6, villains who slowly go insane over the course of the story. And finally, one of King's most reliable tropes, and yet the most problematic, magical Negroes. King certainly enjoys himself a good, wise, gentle, older black man who can offer some well-needed advice to the white writer protagonist to get them set on the right path again. Now, if anyone out there has read King's Twitter, you already know that King's got extremely normie, liberal, boomer dad energy in real life, and you'll see a lot of that in his writing as well. Now, some people have called King's style of writing Lovecraftian, in the sense that it does sometimes deal with unknowable terrors from beyond human understanding, but I really don't buy that description. King's style of horror is generally a lot more grounded in day-to-day reality. He's a guy who can make just mundane, everyday things absolutely terrifying. Whether he's talking about a car, a dog, a hedge maze, a laundry press. That's King's forte, is just taking the ordinary and giving it just a hint of terror. In fact, I'd say the key to King's success is his break with Lovecraft. Lovecraft's cosmic horror generally posits a universe that is indifferent and hostile to humans. There's no good out there. The best that humans can hope for is to be ignored by all the bad things lurking just beyond the veil. King's writing, in contrast, and this holds true throughout the Kingiverse, and there is a Kingiverse. Generally, he does include cross-references between stories to indicate that they all kind of take place in the same AU, is essentially Manetian. King envisions a universe where good and evil are equal opposing forces, locked in eternal struggle. Now, Pennywise the evil clown in It is a very Lovecraft sort of villain, but he is opposed by the Turtle, who is the guardian of all good in the multiverse. Randall Flagg, who is essentially King's version of the devil, is opposed in The Stand by the literal hand of God coming down to thwart his plan. And even in Cell, which is generally a much more reality-based horror story than many of other King's others, there's nothing overtly supernatural in it. There's a very strong implication that there's some sort of universal force of good that helped Clay find the missing telephone number that allows him to destroy the Raggedy Man. I wouldn't say that King's books have happy endings, but they do have hopeful ones. Evil in King's universe is something that can be banished or destroyed, sometimes even permanently. In fact, it's kind of hard to read the fiery destruction of the Overlook Hotel or the death of Cujo as anything other than examples of evil being completely routed. Innocent people do die in King's books, but survivors often find themselves returned to a status quo, confident that evil has been defeated and that the world will go on. That's in stark contrast to a lot of other horror writers who traffic in the nihilistic pessimism of an indifferent universe, which unfortunately can be kind of a turnoff to the normie demographic, because it's kind of a downer. King's work, in contrast, is just mainstream enough that he can appeal to people who are not self-identified horror fans. If you want a delicious little thrill, a little scare, but you don't want to be too depressed, then King's really your man. Not a lot of blood, not a lot of gore, and always the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things will turn out okay in the end. And that's really the secret that makes King the top dog of the horror field. Crap, I should have said he was king of horror writers. It's right there in the name. Hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. If you did, feel free to like and/or subscribe, which I understand is a thing that people do on YouTube. If you are in fact watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on a local public access, then you can't do either of those things. But regardless of where you're seeing this, you can check out our Twitter account. It's midnight_pals. And there's a lot more horror-related good stuff there. That's where I make Twitter jokes about all my favorite, by extension, your favorite, horror writers as well. We also have our book available in both physical media and digital download, so feel free to DM us on Twitter all about that. Finally, if you are seeing this on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment about your own feelings about Stephen King. I'm sure they're very well thought out.
Ghostbusters.